Today we begin with part 4 of The Dream House by Craig Higginson. Please ensure that you have everything that you need with you before we begin. Your own notes on the novel should be taking shape. For your information on characters, you might like to add John Ford to your list, and the 2 dead characters, the infant Rachel and the adult Grace. Turn to page 153 in your copy of the novel. Here, Beauty is surprised, offended maybe, to find Becky sitting in the kitchen as if he owns the place. Richard is still missing. She's aware that Becky doesn't fully see her, and she wishes this were not the case. She asks if he has spoken to Looksmart, and he has, but he is reluctant to share the details. Richard returns, covered in mud. Instead of bringing him inside, she leads Richard to her dark, unfinished house. He remains confused, but she dries him and puts a t-shirt on him. He seems to doubt that it is indeed home, but for now, he is safe and dry. The Zulu dialogue here refers to a ghost. Beauty is talking to Becky, wishing that he would take note of her. Of course, there are many other ghosts in this story, ghosts that haunt the characters and influence their actions. Grace, Rachel, the shadow of the past that is cast over the lives of these characters is long and dark. In quote 4, the image of the mud child is striking. What do you think this symbolizes? His value to her? His soul, maybe? In quote 5, the reference to their house is telling. Why shouldn't it be their house? And the image of Richard in an ANC t-shirt and the pink anorak in quote 6 is deliberately incongruous. We return to Patricia on page 157. She remembers back to when she met Richard, how he was cunning and bold, and she interpreted this as being visionary. She speaks to Looksmart, expressing that she feels that she might owe him an apology, conceding that none of this is easy. He wants her to be sorry and to continue to tell him how sorry she is. She states that she's leaving to go to Durban. She regrets what happened to that poor girl, but it has happened. She seems to be concerned for him and his future, asking whether he would be able to go away from here and try to become something new. He is dismissive about this concept of having hope for the future. They argue, and she feels the same as when she and Richard argued. Looksmart does not seem to hear her words. They are not communicating properly. She acknowledges that she too has died quietly. Her dead child is mentioned. Listen to Dr. Zwecher's audio recording of this passage on the next slide. It takes approximately 15 minutes.
Patricia, page 157. He arrived off a ship from Southampton and came for dinner in Durban. The new manager, fresh out of Cirencester, brought over by her father to run the farm. She can still recall the look of him across the dinner table. His pinkish pale hair and calculating pointed face reminded her of a fox. a fox that had its eye on her potential for eggs. He also spoke as a fox might speak, with an air of tact, sex, and cunning. Oh, he was nothing if not polite back then. But his gaze drifted around the room, taking in the polished silver, the paintings of hunting scenes and ships at sea, and the rich man's daughter sitting across from him with her wayward dark hair and violet blue gaze. He was awkward with the servants, the furniture, the cutlery, but she saw beneath this a residue of mischief that he occasionally shared with her when no one was looking. Even then, Patricia was a fleshy girl. Buxom, he would later call her. Even then, she was far more substantial than he, at least in any way that might have mattered. But he had also come a long way to arrive at that table. Out of the farm where he had been little more than a labourer's son, into a bursary at Cirencester, and across the sea to Durban, South Africa. She liked him for his boldness of vision. Little did she suspect that he had used all of it up. One weekend, she drove up to the farm to have another look at him. They went off on his motorbike to a waterfall for a swim. The water was so cold it took their breath away. It also made their grey underwear completely transparent, which Patricia chose to laugh at, and he followed suit. Afterwards, they sat on the rocks to dry off, their bodies angled away from each other out of modesty. The sound of the water made it difficult to speak, difficult to think, but a quiet hum started up that both of them carried over the next few weeks. I think I owe you an apology, she says. You think? Since Beauty confirmed his story and left the room, Looksmart's moment of triumph seems to have filtered out of him. He's looking smaller, closer to his true age, full of an uncertainty that she has often recognized in herself. But it still seems too easy, he says. What? For all of this? Well, none of this is easy. Immediately she can see that he has no interest in her demonstrations of regret. Perhaps he doubts they could ever match his. But I can't change what happened, Looksmart. Can't you see that? What Richard has done, he has done, and me, well, I will never be able to take back the thoughts I had that you say I had when that poor girl lay bleeding. He gazes at her, looking worried. But you are sorry. She sees he's afraid she'll retract a small apology, not even give him that. Of course I'm sorry. How many times would you like me to say it? Not to be put off, he carries on looking at her, wondering at her. Your apology is all I'm interested in hearing from you, he says at last. Nothing else. For the rest of your days, I want you to be sorry. I want you to be sorry, and I want you to carry on telling me only that. For a moment, she suspects him of exaggeration or at least of trying to make a joke. What are you saying, Looksmart? That you want to see me again after this? She intends this as a kind of a counter joke, idle and ironic. But he appears to take it literally, as if there really is a part of him that might want to see her again. I have no idea what can happen after this. After what? She wonders. For she has hardly any idea of what has passed between them. She knows what he said, what he's claimed as the truth. But what did he come here for? To shout at her? To cut her husband's throat? Surely for more than a word or two of apology. Tomorrow I will be going down to Durban, she says, with Richard and Beauty and Becky. What will happen then? Must everything just carry on as it was before? Is that what you want? It doesn't matter what I want. What do you want? Beyond his desire to tell her his story, perhaps even to hurt her with his story, he doesn't seem to have given this much thought. I suppose what I'm trying to say, she continues, I'm so sorry, is will you be able to go away from here and try to become something new? What are you talking about? I imagine I am talking about hope. Hope? Huh. He laughs this away with a hint of his old hardness. For him, it seems, hope is a flag waved in a country that has yet to exist. Ugh, I've tasted that one out. And now what do you see? The very picture of success. A man with a car, a wife, 2 children. Everything I have ever done, I've done it with hope. Oh, but that doesn't sound so bad, does it? A wife, 2 children. That's a good enough start. He shakes his head and murmurs something unintelligible. Well, in some ways you're actually quite fortunate, she continues. You see, I never even managed to have a child. But she can see he's not about to relent. There's more to a man than a suit. What are you saying? That you are not gratified by your success? He moves away so violently that it makes her start, knocking over a box as he goes and spilling a packet of tiny, shiny cabbage seeds across the floor. You want me to be grateful, he says. Is that what you want? It feels like she's with Richard again, having the same argument. The rug always being yanked out from under her feet as soon as she steps onto it. Is that all you've ever wanted? For me to be grateful for all my gifts? Well, you have had opportunities that many would kill for, she says, hearing in her voice the same tone she uses with Richard. She doesn't quite believe in this tone, she never has, but she has still found it to be effective. I have worked hard for every single thing I've got, he is saying. You think it came to me on a plate. Well, I still don't understand what it is you came here for. What is it you want? He's pacing again, up and down, back and forth, once more saved by his anger, apparently relieved to have regained it. I will tell you what I want for you, old woman. I want for you guilt, darkness. I don't want you to leave this place tomorrow without a backwards glance, and to spend your last days looking at the sea, with your mind all clear, your sleep easy. What I want is for you to remember that dog, like I remember that dog, and I want you to be haunted and decayed away by it. He sits down at the far end of the room, with a thump on a trunk too full of papers. His back is towards her, his head pressed again into his hands as if he wants to compress all his thoughts to an entity the size of a walnut. I think I understand what you feel, she says, so softly that he may not hear. You do. I also know what it is to die quietly. I only married him because I was pregnant. Don't you understand? I'm not interested in hearing about any of your rubbish. My father wanted to kill him when he found out, she says, not really caring whether he's listening or not. But I talked to him and he gave us this farm instead. He was a good man, my father. I like to say he was the one good man in my life. And when he died thinking I was happy, hoping I was happy, taking my word for it. When he says nothing, she leans towards him and adds, but it was only much later, when you started to hang around the house, that I was happy again for a bit. He stares at her out of his grief, looking about as lost as he has ever been. Not knowing where else to plant her gaze, she can only look back at him. But you told me that you never managed to have a child, he says. What? Now you tell me he made you pregnant. I had one, she says, suddenly not trusting herself to speak. And this one child, is it still alive or what? I think that is my business.
Looksmart has finally said what he wants to say. This is the falling action of the play structure. In quotes 2 and 3, Patricia says that she doesn't want Looksmart's life to be wasted because of her, because of them. Does this redeem her somewhat? This is the crux of Looksmart's motivation for returning to Dwaleni. This is what he came for. Not murder, not retribution, guilt. Read pages 162 to 164. All of Looksmart's pent-up rage and indignation burst out, and Looksmart flings a trunk across the room, making the papers flutter like confetti without a bride under it. An amazing image. He has a snarl on his face, and he's out of control, having lost that sense of power and self-control that he had earlier. He insists on knowing about the child, and we learn that he thought of himself as Patricia's child. He compares himself to the fish that he killed, and he feels that he too lost his life, like the fish. Patricia insists that the fish was released, but that isn't the way that Looksmart remembers the past. She remembers sending him to the school that he wanted to go to, writing to him for 5 years and treating him like her son. He is merciless, remembering primarily that every holiday he came back to sleep in his mud hut. The unreliability of multiple perspectives is foregrounded here. Looksmart remembers the fish being killed, but Patricia is sure it was released. She also sees him as being educated and released, but Looksmart's departure left Patricia feeling partially dead inside, lost. Patricia certainly cared for Looksmart, but she didn't help his mother. Should she have? Patricia's story continues from page 165. Remembering her stillborn, Patricia reflects, she arrived 2 months early and 2 days dead. Understandably, Patricia felt totally abandoned and empty at the time, and still nurses that intense heartache. She doesn't remember if Richard was with her, but she does remember that it would be only later that she was able to cry. To heighten this tragedy, Patricia is unable to have any more children. She shares these details with Looksmart, telling of how she bred Welsh ponies for other people's children and tended to her roses. Looksmart seems to have lost some of his fight. Perhaps he wasn't expecting to see Patricia as a victim too. Looksmart brought joy back to Patricia, but as he grew older, he began to judge her. He spent time staring at the photographs, especially one of Richard with 2 dead leopards. Patricia admits that she associated the loss of Rachel, her baby, with the loss of Looksmart when he was a young adult, as it was easier to think of him as dead than as ungrateful or as a disappointment. Let's listen to the audio recording of this passage on the next slide.
Patricia, page 165. She arrived 2 months early and 2 days dead. Patricia awoke in the hospital room to find a hollow wind running through her body where a child had been. They brought the bundle for her to look at. The baby had been cleaned and wrapped in a cloth. But there was no mistaking that she was dead. The tiny grey form, the dark shock of hair, the pale blue eyelids firmly shut against the world. The eyes that would never see, the mouth that would never speak. All those cells dividing and redividing to form a child that lacked nothing except a life. That secret current that comes from nowhere, entering into some forms and forsaking others, randomly. Or so it seemed to Patricia. She looked like she was made from wax, the blood drawn out of her. She was the color of a bruise, but still she glowed, a quiet yellow light that came from deep inside of her. A moon fading back into her heart. The small head lolled back in a final gesture of abandonment as Patricia took the child in her arms. The body forever lost in the world, without any defense. Rachel would be forever dead. The nurses brought her back later in a box the size for shoes. Patricia carried her out the hospital and into another day, the light around her seeming to fall on foreign ground. Richard might have been standing beside her. Oh, she didn't remember. And it would only be later that she was able to cry. There would be whole afternoons ahead of her in which there was nothing left to do but weep. The weeping would usually come without warning, sometimes in the car, outside the shops, or on the dirt road leading away from the house. Otherwise, it would come while sipping soup, or removing a shoe, or doing nothing at all. The emptiness in her body, just below her heart, has never left her. She can summon it up merely by thinking about it. A sensation like butterflies trying to get out. Afterwards, she would not be able to have another child, and with whom went all her hope. That word she used with Looksmart, hope, using it as though it had any meaning for her. Oh, but perhaps he would have better luck with it than she ever did. In the days that followed Rachel's death, all she saw was the thin path laying ahead of her, with Rachel's death at the beginning of it and her own death at the end of it. There could be nothing else between. Only her days under the bloodwoods, which sounded like a dark sea hissing and sighing and swaying around her, always approaching but never managing to reach her. You wouldn't know what it is to lose a child. It was a time of darkness, long nights and long days, and everything made dark. What about your husband? What about him? Well, how did he deal with it? Oh, Richard stood around a lot, not meeting her eyes whenever she turned to him. She watched him as he crept away, a lame dog. He tried to hide himself in the farm. Coward. A coward he was. Not very well, she says. And you? She sat in this chair, and kept her mouth shut. She bred Welsh ponies for other people's children. I tended my roses. I see. She can sense a change in him now. He looks like he's given up on her, or given up on this particular fight. Perhaps he's not so sure what the differences between them are anymore. Perhaps the deaths of Rachel and Grace have leveled the land between them and established clearer perspectives. It is because of this thought that she can say the next thing, which would have been impossible only a few minutes earlier. Didn't you know? She says. What? Didn't you know that you are the only child ever to be happy in this house? She watches him twist away from this idea. It's a gesture she knows well, and it is a sign of pleasure, not of pain or humiliation. When he was a boy, he would squirm under the knowledge of her gaze exactly like this. On the athletics field and during chapel and on speech day, when there was a snicker every year when he walked away once again with a Zulu prize. You were like the sun, she says. My son. Carrot cake was his favorite. She would often have one made to welcome him home for the holidays. They would sit on the stoop and he would still be wearing his greys, his military tan shoes and black and white striped tie, always tied in a Windsor knot, as taught by John Ford during Monday morning assembly. And they would munch on the cake while he told her what had happened to him at school since they'd last met. Only when he was finished would she tell him about the farm, which generally involved a list of births and deaths and the usual glossing over financial loss. She never wondered what he might be glossing over, or when the glossing over might have started. And then you started to judge me, she says. I did. I can still see you, standing in the corridor. Doing what exactly? Looking at all the photographs with a look of terrible contempt. Well, there was a picture of your husband I used to stare at, he tells her, with the two dead leopards. It used to fascinate me, that picture. I don't know why, but in his eyes there was this expression like he didn't know what it was he'd lost. He glances at the place where the couch was. But there is only a pile of boxes there. Where are those leopard skins now? He says. Oh, packed away, I expect. It wasn't just the photographs he started to judge. It was every object in the house. The crockery, the linen, the size of the taps. Everything around him would come to stand between them like a wall. I thought it was adolescence, she continues. I thought it would pass. What? He feigned ignorance. but it never did. This time he doesn't dodge away. He seems to choose to look at her directly, perhaps the better to disguise himself. No, he says, it never did. It happened so quickly, the loss of Looksmart. She raised the subject with John Ford once. John apparently being the authority on boys, and was told that boys were like that. One minute they were there, munching on cake, chattering about their day, and the next day they'd vanished, leaving dirty socks on the bedroom floor, half-finished mugs of tea in the lounge, and the front door agape. John told her to be patient. Even though the boy was not his son, he would be sure to come back. His years with her had been far too significant. I wonder if I connected your disappearance and Grace. You know, at the time I might have. I honestly can't tell you now. He looks at her, as if to suggest that it doesn't matter, or perhaps to suggest that what he thought mattered is not what matters after all. But after a while, I came to think of you as another dead child. He shakes his head, apparently wanting to distance himself from that other child. I didn't want to think of you as taking from me and giving nothing back. She continues. You see, it was against my idea of you.
The loss of her baby had a devastating impact on Patricia. To her, Rachel would be forever dead. But to Richard, the death of his infant daughter is a constant torment. You'll note in quote 4 the continuation, the repetition of the dog imagery. And the wordplay on son in the 5th quote is obvious. Before you tackle the reading and questions on this section of the novel, I would like you to watch the TED Talk delivered by Chimamanda Adichie entitled The Dangers of a Single Story. The link is on this slide, and for my own pupils, it's on the lesson plans which you received for this lesson. It's a 20-minute speech followed by 6 questions. The first 5 questions here relate to the speaker's experiences as a Black Nigerian living in the United States of America. The 6th question requires you to apply the principles of the TED Talk, the dangers of a single story, to this novel. Think about the way that the novel has been put together. There are no chapter numbers. There are sections representing the points of view of different characters, accounts of their flawed memories, their truths. As always, you are required to read the commentary and analysis of this section in your study guide. When you have done that, answer the questions in the study guide. These questions shine a light on Beauty's relationship with Richard. Is she being particularly caring or concerned about his welfare? Or is she more concerned about Looksmart's reaction to seeing Richard? Here you need to consider the effect of Richard's move from England to South Africa on him, a white man in Africa. What prompted this move? In question 4, you will write about the dog imagery that permeates this novel. What does the dog symbolize? These 2 questions refer to the impossible loss experienced by Patricia and her motivation in mothering Looksmart. Is Looksmart a replacement for Rachel? The answers to the questions are suggestions. Pause the video and compare what is written on the screen with what you have written in your books. You should contextualize references such as this one. Explain the significance of the ANC in the politics of the time. It's an important part of the setting of the novel and helps the reader to understand the actions of the characters, the nuances in the writing. The animal imagery continues. Patricia describes Richard as a fox. Her disappointment in her spouse is obvious. The dog is both literal and figurative. Looksmart is referring to the dog that killed Grace, but he's also referring to the dog as a symbol of racism, fear, suspicion. Unless you have experienced such a tragedy yourself, you cannot understand how the loss of a child impacts every moment of a mother's life. Patricia's maternal aspirations and joys have to be lived by proxy through the children of other mothers. Looksmart's reaction is curious. Is he jealous of Rachel, a dead baby? How does he see his relationship with Patricia? Continue with your notes, jotting down your thoughts. As some of you return to the classroom, I am aware of the privileged position in which we find ourselves with access to online lesson materials. What are you doing to ensure that your peers have access to similar resources? Have you or your school set up a partnership with other students or institutions? If we work together, we'll be stronger. Until our next lesson, goodbye.